The Pokemon TCG's upcoming 2024 rotation is almost here, but Japanese players have already started to get a taste of what this new format entails. With the release of what will eventually be our Temporal Forces set, the end of January saw the first batch of local tournaments similar in size to our League Cups and League Challenges kick off in this new format. Today we're going to break down a variety of these different winning deck lists, courtesy of friends of the channel over at PokemonCard.io. And there are many more lists that couldn't fit into this video, so if you want to see all of the winning lists for January, I'll have a link down below in the description for you to check out after this video. But with that being said, be sure to smack that like button to feed that algorithm, and let's check out what's been winning in Japan for the month of January. Even after losing important cards like Path to the Peak, Escape Rope, and Battle VIP Pass, Giratina VSTAR is already off to a hot start in this new format. Losing Path means the deck no longer can be as disruptive, but it has gained many new cards to replace some of the other staples that it lost. Artisan, along with the new Buddy Poffin card that can find 2 basic Pokemon under 70 HP, start to fill the void that was left by Battle VIP Pass. It also gained the new Emergency Board tool card that reduces your Pokemon's retreat cost, which now enables you to more easily freely switch between comfies, an effect that the deck really hasn't been able to do without the help of something like Beach Court. Many of these early Giratina lists do look pretty similar, but the big split we're starting to see is when it comes to what ace spec card they are using. Prime Catcher, for good reason, did pop up in a few winning lists, as it basically acts as an escape rope on steroids. But the list that won a 64-person City League tournament was actually using the new Maximum Belt, which lets the Pokemon it's attached to do 50 more damage to an opposing Pokemon EX. Without Path to the Peak, Tina's Charizard matchup does get a bit worse, and that might not be a loss that you can afford with how good Charizard EX is already performing. Now as the Tina player, you can take a one-hit KO as always with Star Requiem, but now with a Maximum Belt, Lost Impact can deal that perfect 330 damage to one-shot another Zard. I might even say this is probably my preferred ace spec for Giratina VSTAR right now. Chien-Pao is a deck that has waned in popularity as of lately, but after the rotation could be on the rise once again. It's always had a good Charizard matchup, and it's one of the few decks that arguably gains more cards than it loses after the rotation. The new Buddy Poffin does a decent job replacing Battle VIP Pass here, as the main Pokemon you really need on turn 1 are your pre-evolutions, like Frigibax and Bidoof anyways. And it also makes playing down your hand in the mid to late game to draw more cards with Burrell much easier than it ever was to do with Battle VIP Pass. But unlike Giratina, I don't think there is a debate over what the correct ace spec here should be. Prime Catcher is such an amazing replacement for Cross Switcher, now only taking up 1 deck spot as opposed to a whopping 4 and needing multiple to be played simultaneously. For that reason, I really like the inclusion here to still play Canceling Cologne as well. Between Chien-Pao, Iron Hands, or your Radiant Greninja plus Catcher and Cologne, this list really has a way to take multiple prize cards anytime it attacks, really no matter what your opponent is throwing up into the active spot. Another inclusion I do like here is the new Cryptomaniac's Deciphering. Like the old Mallow supporter card, it lets you search a deck for 2 cards and put them on top of your deck. And with either Radiant Greninja, Burrell, or even Pokestop, you can draw those cards immediately. A lot of the time, I think this will just function similar to having like a 5th copy of Irida, but it does give you more flexibility over grabbing maybe 2 item cards instead of being forced to grab a Pokemon. No Manaphy here is a little bit sus, but overall, I think this winning list provides a really good snapshot for what Chien-Pao will probably look like after rotation. While neither of the new big ancient or future Pokemon seem to have won a City League at the time of recording, both new archetypes still managed to take down some of these smaller tournaments. We saw Raging Bolt players in particular win with wildly varying lists, and this could maybe even explain the lack of a bigger tournament win, as I think players are probably still just trying to figure out what the best engine for the card is. But largely these winning lists fell into one of 3 camps. The first version we saw winning was with Gardevoir EX. Corollia in particular really seems to synergize nicely with Raging Bolt, as it gives the deck a draw engine, and all of your energy acceleration is based out of the discard pile anyways. I do imagine this version takes a little bit longer to get set up, but if you can manage to get 5 of your Psychic Energy into the discard pile, Gardevoir EX's Psychic Embraceability guarantees that you're doing 350 damage any turn, and that's not factoring in the other energy you'll have in play needed to cover this attack cost. The second version, and also what seemed to be the most common here, was with Sandy Shock's EX. Like Gardevoir, it does take a little bit of time to get going, as you have to wait for your opponent to take 2 prizes before Sandy Shocks can use its ability, but being largely just based around ancient Pokemon means that Professor Sada is going to be live more often than not, and Ancient Booster Energy Capsule gains more value to run too. Plus, you don't have to juggle a Stage 2. It looks like the engine here is pretty similar to what we've seen in Roaring Moonless, but it feels like you're kind of trading Dark Patch for a one-hit KO attacker that is substantially more tanky than Moon. And maybe that's good enough. The final version is more of just a sub-variant of the Sandy Shocks build, but now has Palkia's Star Portal V-Star power to let you put on some early aggression instead of waiting around for your opponent to take 2 prize cards to activate Sandy Shocks' ability. It also gives the deck maybe a more stable attacker that could be better into 1 prize Pokemon, where you might not want to be constantly discarding your energy to knock out. Palkia does take up some extra deck space, but I've got to say I do really like this idea, and on paper at least, seems to fix one of the issues the vanilla Sandy Shocks build has. As far as A-specs go, Prime Catcher does seem to be the main one players are running across all these versions, but for the Sandy Shocks build in particular, some players were playing the new Awakening Drum that allows you to draw a card for each of your ancient Pokemon in play. I honestly don't have an opinion on one over the other just yet, but these at least do appear to probably be the best A-spec options to pick from. However, there was one new ancient deck that did manage to take down one of these bigger City League tournaments, and that's what appears to be a new Roaring Moon EX deck that almost functions more like an ancient toolbox now. Probably the 2 biggest additions to the deck come in the form of some new single prize ancient Pokemon. Unlike Morpeko, the most popular single prizer we've seen in these types of decks up until now, this new Roaring Moon gives you a much tankier single prize attacker to take cheap prizes with. 140 HP already puts it out of range of attacks of cards like Radiant Greninja, Cramorant, etc., but with the Ancient Booster Energy Capsule could bait your opponent into having to use a multi-prize Pokemon that you can just return KO with your EX. I know in theory this attack can hit for big numbers, since it does more damage for each ancient Pokemon in the discard pile, but I think here it's being used more so just to respond to any low HP, single prize Pokemon your opponent might try to force you to go through. This new Fluttermane here also does seem pretty cool, as it can shut off the abilities of your opponent's active Pokemon. This seems especially annoying for Lost Zone decks, but I'm kind of surprised the counts for this and the new Roaring Moon aren't inverted. To me, it seems like you would prefer to try to open with Fluttermane to stop decks from getting set up, and then just discard the extra copies over the course of the game. But maybe there's a line of play I'm not picking up on here. We have a new supporter called Explorer's Guidance making its way into the list, kind of similar to the old Hapu and Sage's Training of the past, and lets you look at the top 6 cards of your deck, keep 2, and discard the others. Is this better than just playing Professor's Research? I'm not entirely sure just yet, but I could at least see how some copies of the card could make sense here. I think Roaring Moon did look like it might be in danger of not being able to thrive after the rotation, but what the deck has lost in aggression, at least so far, appears to be made up for in terms of having a more versatile assortment of attackers. One deck that racked up a ton of smaller tournament wins was the new Great Tusk Mill deck, and I'm not gonna lie, this deck seemed like a complete meme, and who knows, maybe it still is, but early results are at least painting a slightly more optimistic future for it. This new Great Tusk discards the top card of your opponent's deck, but if you played an Ancient Supporter this turn, you discard 4 cards instead. So actually a bit similar to the Durant deck that also had a surprising number of decent finishes about a season or so ago. The idea here appears to be, depending on how your hand looks on a given turn, you either use Explorer's Guidance plus a double Turbo Energy, or you use Professor Sada plus a basic energy to get off your attacks. I do think this attack is a bit more restrictive than how Durant worked, but there are also some pretty big upsides as well. Great Tusk is a far tankier Pokemon, and that's before even slapping down an Ancient Booster Energy Capsule, or the new A-Spec Hero's Cape that buffs your Pokemon by 100 HP. This means that unlike Durant, low resource attackers like Cramorant can't keep easily slapping down your Great Tusks turn after turn. I really do like how this deck appears to force your opponent into committing to attackers that require more resources to get going, and if you're milling 4 cards turn after turn, maybe this could be a problem for them by the end of the game too. Hand Clippers is the only other new card to point out here, and I do think this card will be insane for really any control deck that may pop up. It forces both players to discard cards in their hand until they only have 5 remaining. A common strategy this combats against is going to be players that try to amass a large hand size and then use either Iono or Judge to prevent themselves from decking out. My knee-jerk reaction is that I'm not sure if the deck needs all 4 copies of the card though. It seems like if you just use this card once or twice, that's probably going to be good enough. A couple of the other winning Great Tusk lists were running some combination of cards like Mimikyu, Trekking Shoes, or Crushing Hammer, so maybe there are some cuts that could be made here to maybe fit in a few of those too. And finally today we have a few winning lists for what definitely appears to be the BDIF of this new format, and that's going to be Charizard EX. The deck did lose a few things in the rotation, probably most notably the Celebrations Mew, but honestly I think right now the deck is looking better positioned than it's ever been. One of its worst matchups, Gardevoir EX, is on the decline so far, and decks like Giratina no longer have Path to shut Zard out of a game. But even in terms of new cards, here you can see the deck has gotten some buffs. Buddy Poffin not only fills that void left by the Battle VIP Pass, but in decks like Charizard, I would actually argue it's a direct upgrade, since the only Pokemon you can't search out with it is going to be Rotom V. I don't know about you, but I will happily take that trade if it means that Buddy Poffin is a live card for the rest of the game. The other big new card I really like here is Maximum Belt. Previously, we have seen some Charizard lists running Justified Gloves to give them a bit of an edge in the mirror match, and also help to answer a Roaring Moon EX in the early game. This just sort of feels like a better version of that card, mainly because it also helps against things like Chien-Pao, Iron Hands, etc. too. But this list in particular seems like they are teching super hard for the mirror match. Not only do you have Maximum Belt, but they also have a whopping 2 TM Devos. This kind of feels like overkill to me, but if Zard is indeed the most dominant deck going forward, maybe all of these mirror techs are going to be justified. But we also have a winning Bibzard list to check out. I actually took this version of Charizard to a Day 2 finish at the recent Charlotte Regionals, so seeing this one still continue to do well definitely has me excited to see. And honestly, this version might be picking up some steam, as I'd estimate there were a near even amount of the Pidgeot version and the Burrell versions popping up in these tournament results. However, this specific list does appear to be pretty light on tech cards that are good in the mirror match. You can see they aren't playing any copies of TM Devo, and are favoring Prime Catcher instead of Maximum Belt as their ace spec. Prime Catcher is still a great card, and it does still help with any Barrel stall plays your opponent might try to go for, but right now I'm definitely leaning a little bit more towards Maximum Belt as the ace spec of choice for Charizard. But like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, these are only a small selection of the archetypes that were doing well in this early post-rotation format. So if you do want to see all of the winning deck lists for January, I'll be sure to put a link down below in the description for you to check out. And out of all the decks that I covered today, what are the ones that you are most excited to try out in this new format? Be sure to let me know down below in that comment section. But if you did enjoy today's content, just be sure to smack that like button. And if you're feeling maybe a little bit extra generous, you can also become a patron at patreon.com/rarecandytcg or pick up some merch at rarecandytcg.com. But as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.